Hello, my name is Sarah Swedberg, and this is a very brief presentation on eligibility for special education for Education 540. Now, one of the things that we do as educators is that we think about whether or not our students should be moved into some form of special education setting. Now, that process begins with referral. Generally, the referral comes from a parent who is concerned about their child's academic or behavioral achievements. Sometimes it's from a teacher who has the same concerns. The student doesn't seem to be achieving what we would like them to achieve to reach those grade level benchmarks. Once that referral is put into place, the next step is an evaluation of whether or not that student is eligible for special education or not. And once that eligibility determination is made, the next step is to put in place an individualized education program or an IEP, but that is a topic for another presentation. The timelines can vary state by state. They generally follow the same number of days, but they can be a little bit different. So I looked up the timeline in Virginia, which is where I'm teaching. In Virginia, as soon as that referral is put in place, the special education team has 10 business days to review that referral and decide if an evaluation is warranted. An evaluation contains many different steps, and I'll talk about some of these. But the end goal is to get to that eligibility determination. And so from the very start, from the referral to the evaluation is 10 days, but from the referral to the eligibility determination is 65 business days to determine whether or not that student is eligible for special education or is not eligible for special education. And a big part of this determination comes from the psychoeducational evaluation report, generally done by a psychologist or similar professional, oftentimes based right there in the school. There can be a number of different components of this, but because one of the things that a special education team is trying to do is to determine whether or not the student is low performing because of low intelligence, or if their intelligence is typical for someone of their age, if there are other learning difficulties or barriers in the way of them achieving their grade level benchmarks. So the big question I put there at the bottom is the student's achievement low despite having typical intelligence? Now, in every stage of this, it's very important to understand typical development. Are the perceived differences in any student within the normal range for that age group? Because there can be a wide variation of how students are performing within any grade level. Are there delays or difficulties greater than or less than typically seen in their peers? In every case, understanding the normal range of development for any age group provides a more accurate and fair measure for evaluation. And those words, accurate and fair, are really important. So I put a caveat here at the bottom of this slide because there can be multiple factors that affect students' performance beyond a disability. And there's a lot of research in this. I'm going to put some of it in my references. Have we checked for our own implicit bias? Have we, as an institution, checked for implicit bias? Do we think these students are of lower intelligence because they speak a non-standard form of English, or maybe they're English language learners? Are they dependent learners, meaning do they come out of a household where they haven't had a lot of academic modeling from parents or other caregivers, and all of that needs to come through school? do we know the socioeconomic background of the student? The questions can go on and on. Those are just some of the main ones we need to think of. And when we think about this, it's really important to keep all of these things in mind because the numbers tell what can be a chilling story. Students of color are disproportionately overrepresented among students with disabilities. Do they have disabilities? In which case, absolutely, they belong in special education. But do we look at them and see students who are less than capable? Do we believe implicitly that they are less capable of achieving and therefore see them in a different light? Black students in particular are twice as likely to be identified as having emotional disturbance or an intellectual disability. There are also correlations between this data and school suspensions. So one of the questions that is very important for me as an educator is how do I disrupt racism or other forms of prejudice? And when I look at a student and go through that process of referral and evaluation, am I doing it in as unbiased manner as possible? Do I recognize my own implicit biases? Can I see that those implicit biases in others? Because that needs to play a role in this as well. So the psychoeducational evaluation done by a psychologist is super important, but both general education and special education teachers will be on the team that makes the final determinations and works towards, if it is determined that a student is eligible for special education, makes the determination about what those IEP goals should be. For the general education teacher, they're often the person who notices that the student is not performing to grade level. How is the student performing or behaving in classes? It's also important to look at strengths. So general education teachers should always look at both strengths and weaknesses of any given student. What have they tried already? Have they tried a number of interventions in the classroom which haven't worked? Now, the special education teacher probably has less day-to-day with a student as they go through the eligibility process. But they will have good information about how a disability might affect academic performance or behavior. And they might take a look at the instructional strategies a general education teacher has put into place and have a better sense of whether or not the continued low achievement of a student is because different instructional strategies should be used, or is it actually true that these are the right instructional strategies and they're not working and therefore might be an indication of a learning disability. There are a number of different assessments a special education teacher can make, and this is true for the general education teachers as well. We can use formal assessments in this process. We can use standardized tests. We can use norm referenced assessment. We can use summative assessments that we use in our classroom to see how students are progressing. But we can also use informal assessments as part of the process. These might be classroom observations. Perhaps a general education teacher asks a special education teacher to come in and observe a particular student. And while the student is teaching and the students are engaged in learning, that special education teacher is simply observing and taking notes to think about the academic performance and the behavior of any given student. We might look at academic portfolios, pull different kinds of student work together, and look at it to see what may be signs of a learning disability. So all of this is the process of moving through the stages from the referral to determining eligibility. And once eligibility is determined in the positive that this is a student who needs special education, then the team gets together to go through the next processes. But again, that's for another presentation. Thank you very much for listening, and I look forward to continuing to engage with all of you.